Welcome to the BEI podcast. I'm Lutricia. You know, there's been a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, we're going to focus on BEI, bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance. Our country has been plagued with it since it was founded. Qualified citizens are denied leadership, silenced, labeled incompetent, all because of who they are or what they look like. We ask, what does it mean to be qualified and who decides? How do we determine who gets to participate in the American experiment? Can we live up to the principles of our democracy, liberty, and justice for all? So, Lynda Edwards is a very talented artist and a former teacher, and Dr. Valerie Johnson is an anthropologist who now works for, tell me again, Val, you work for?
The North Carolina Environmental Justice Network.
Okay. And is it safe to say that the two of you created this wonderful museum that we're going to talk about today?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I want to start by just asking the two of you, what led to this idea? What prompted you and motivated you to take on this, amazing product that you've created here? What were you thinking about, and what were your questions that you were trying to answer?
Lynda,
Either
I'll let you start.
Of course you
one. Okay,
would.
Nan.
Well, short version.
I had some complaints and concerns about the State Museum, and I took it to them in Raleigh. And I took it to them. We had several meetings and whatnot, conversations. And of course, they listened and all that, but they weren't moving. So that started around March of 2017. So by November 2017, I was pretty much done with meetings on my own. So in December 2017, really literally on Christmas Eve, I just woke up in the middle of the night and put together the museum on Facebook. So the museum came from the point that our stories, Black North Carolinians, our history was not being promoted, lifted up, talked about, other than what Black History Month and Juneteenth. Or and every now and then, what they will do a little bit at Martin Luther King birthday and Martin Luther King Day.
Right. Yeah.
And so we, Val and I talked, and we wanted more because we know it's possible. And so I just started collecting other people's research, other people's story, whatever I could find online. And I started building the museum on Facebook. And about 2019, we started a website. Spent about 2 years on that. And unfortunately, the person building the infrastructure of it for us backed out.
That's the better way to say
Yeah,
it.
thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. So that was, we'd gotten trade. We also applied for USPTO trademarks, and we had received them in 2022, I think, 2023, and of April. And in July, after we got the trademarks, is when the person backed out, the first web designer. So we went from July until about December of 2023 and met up, met up with two great web designers, two Black women. They loved the idea. They'd never done anything this big because basically we're making a database, a clearinghouse, and it's huge. It's a lot of infrastructure with the coding and stuff like that. And they took it on, and now we have the website, short story. And so we have been transferring all the information from the Facebook photo albums, which is what they call it, to the website, to the different collections. And we've got the majority of it transferred. I'm still now, they're working behind the scenes still, but now I've stepped in more since they've got it up live and running. So I'm still transferring some of the collection, some of the pieces they didn't already transfer. And I'm also continuously adding new pieces.
Because pretty much every day we get new information, or someone will point us into, it'll be maybe just a name, point us into a direction that we need to investigate. And the idea is to just, the research is there, the information is out there, it's just not in a single place, and it's not easy to uncover. So we want to provide that place for
Yeah.
folks. They can go and they can find out about a variety of topics.
Yeah. So I'm hearing both of you say that you felt that this project was important because the stories of Black people in North Carolina needed to be told and lifted up and understood.
And
Yes.
housed.
That was like the primary motivation for the two of you starting this project.
That's true. And the other side, the other pieces of this, because it is very multifaceted, is it was a vision. It was a
Yeah.
vision. It was a fire
Mm-hmm.
in me, and we wanted to make sure, because both of us are educators, so we know without having access to information, nobody can teach it, nobody can pass it on, nobody can access it. So we kind of consider ourselves decolonizing museums, decolonizing access, and making sure freedom is available through education.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And this is before what's been happening currently with the Library of Congress and access to data being shut down here, there, and everywhere by evil people in government. We were doing this before then as an anticipation. I really think of Lynda as visionary because she got ahead of what was coming down.
Right. Because now this material is really important given what's been happening with the Library of Congress and all of that. I've been looking through it. It's fascinating. I mean, you could just go to a section, hit explore, and I mean, you could spend hours in any one section. What I want us to talk about today is the after emancipation, that section, because I found that incredibly. And given our conversation, because, you know, this podcast is about, I mean, we sort of have the same vision, is reminding people and informing people, folks, about how this country, what happened. Because we have this fantasy about this country being this noble, you know, effort where the people were righteous and just and everybody was treated fairly and there was no dissension or no difficulty. We kind of slide over the civil rights movement and over focus on, the founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, Adams, as the story of America is what these people did. And so, what we want to do on this podcast, particularly because we had so much controversy about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I felt like it was really important for people to understand how bigotry, exclusion, and ignorance has informed our society and has, in fact, been deeply embedded into the soil that built this country. So that's why I really appreciated this museum, because it talks about that and gives us in a very, I don't want to say entertaining, but very engaging way, allows us to look at what really, really happened and the rest of the story that we don't tell.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about, you, of course, you focus your work in North Carolina, but the stories you tell about North Carolina are stories that apply everywhere. I mean, I mean, the content may be different, but the bigotry and the exclusion and the ignorance is pretty much still the same.
If I may,
Yeah,
Lynda, talk a little bit about the categories, because it's one thing to amass everything into this database, but what made you come up with the different categories that you did? If you could give us some examples, because we have the after emancipation, but
yeah,
what else is there?
There is healthcare, education and educators, music, the arts. Well, we put it under the arts. I had things separated with music and artists
yeah.
and theater.
But yeah, there's agriculture and farming.
Right. Every aspect of life, that
Yeah,
all the things that we were forced into here that was being done in any other country on any other continent.
But if you go to the section on emancipation,
Yeah.
after emancipation,
Yes.
so the first section on this is visit of the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm just interested in this image. Can you say more about this visit of the Ku Klux Klan? It's a picture of a family, and they're in their home, and it looks like the KKK is in the door holding guns.
If I remember correctly, without looking directly at it, they were looking for a specific black man who they wanted to kill because he was standing up against them and protecting his family and speaking out against a new form of slavery. So, how we set it up, the platform is set up where you have the title, and the title is based on the painting. And so it was by Frank Billy. I give the description of the art because that's also as important. And it was featured in a Harper's Weekly, which a lot of younger folk may not know that was a older magazine type. So this was about they were coming to kill the family, but they were coming to kill the man. And because he had caused so much trouble within his community, they were raising up because at this point, after emancipation, it was a Reconstruction era.
Right.
And they were mad because blacks were doing too well without them. And they weren't making any more money off of us because they segregated everything. We had started everything, businesses, everything we were forced to learn from being enslaved. We took that, most of the people took that and turned them into their own businesses.
Right.
And what a lot of people do not understand is during the Reconstruction era, there was no you can go in white stores. It really wasn't about that. You still had to go, it was a color line.
Right. This is occurring during Reconstruction.
Yes.
Okay. And during the time of Reconstruction, we know that Reconstruction didn't go very well. We know that it didn't last well.
It lasted about 12 years.
Yes.
About 12 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because it was right the building back after, emancipation. You've got all of these millions of people who have been released from enslavement. But that means then how do they become a part of the society? And that was the dream of Reconstruction, was to create this open society, a truly democratic society, which is when you had senators, black senators and Congress people going to Washington for the first time, being elected from the southern district, the southern states, and immediate clapback. The immediate oppression occurs because of the intolerance against these people, these colored peoples, because that included Native Americans who would be considered not Native but were claiming to be black in order to be able to be incorporated in society, but they were actually indigenous folks. I mean, there was a lot going on during this time.
Actually, the KKK was sort of a response to their opposition to
Oh yes,
Freedmen's Bureau and black enfranchisement, like getting the right to vote. I mean, the KKK actually emerged as the resistance
Exactly.
a
to that
violent
Very
resistance,
violent
violent.
resistance.
a terrorist resistance.
Very much
See,
so.
people try to downplay they were just an organization, they're just this historical cultural moment. No, the intent was genocide. The intent was to destroy this burgeoning black
This
autonomy.
new population of citizens who were now citizens on their way to being
Mhm.
citizens,
Right.
fully enfranchised. Well, they were fully, we were fully
Yes,
enfranchised.
because you also had this mix of folks who had been enslaved and free blacks. See, everyone loses that part of the story
Mhm.
of the free colored community, and that's important to understand, that no matter how you would look at those free blacks, they helped create some of that infrastructure that was needed because they had obtained the education. They worked to create businesses and to be trained medically, to be trained in architecture,
Mhm.
all of these ways. I mean, that's how we get to start with these historically black colleges and universities, is
Right.
out of that moment where you've got a mix of people who are educated, people who are seeking education, people who haven't quite got there yet, but are, and these are all black folk working together to uplift the entire race.
Right. And I was curious about this because you say the misguided focus on 1619 as the beginning of the slavery in U.S. damages our understanding of American history. So, where would you start if you were looking at American history in terms of the slavery, enslavement of people? So, we're not starting in 1619. Where would we?
That was the first British colonizers.
Those were the first people that came to Jamestown,
Well,
1619.
that's what they say. What actually happened in the 1400s was the Spanish came.
Okay.
And the Spanish came with enslaved Africans. This was all Spanish, what we call now West Virginia, all the way down to Florida and off Tennessee and all that. That was all Spanish. They were the first ones here. So basically, the Spanish fought the British to see who was going to own the colonization rights. The British came later. So
Okay.
1619 is the British. That's the first
That's right.
documented
Okay.
British ship.
And these were folk not sent by the British government, but seeking to establish some place for themselves where they escape the yoke of the British government.
That's what
So that's the
right.
other, in order to have so-called religious freedom, that they wanted to worship in the way they wanted to worship.
Right.
Yeah. Which is a piece of the colonial story, but you got to get the full aspect of it. These early folk coming in then send reports back of the bounty and the richness of this land that they found, and immediately, of course, the British government is saying, oh, we need to have a stake in this too. And that's when you get this imposition of the British government here in what we call the United States.
I see. Yeah. Okay. I'm interested in this section on Alexander Lightfoot Manley because that is 1898. That's Wilmington. I think the thing that really impressed me with this is that it was 100 years before anybody started talking about Wilmington. I remember the first conversations happened in about Wilmington was in 1998. It was in, I mean, before that, this guy that wrote it was David Soselsky, who wrote the Wilmington Massacre or the Wilmington Riot. I think he was at Duke University. He wrote that book, I think, in 1998. And then all of a sudden, there was this big discussion about Wilmington and what happened. We didn't know, for example, that it was a coup, that in fact, the government was literally upended in Wilmington. We didn't know that there was something called the Fusion Party that was a combination of Black people and white people and Native people trying to form a government. So that story really, literally was hidden. Nobody in North Carolina, we didn't see it in museums. People weren't talking about it. We weren't teaching it in the classrooms. But this story of Wilmington and Mr. Manley, who was he ran the newspaper, right?
He and his brother started the
His
newspaper.
brother ran it.
Yes.
So what did you discover about Wilmington in your work and as you put this together?
Well, I learned about it years ago, and I can't pinpoint when. Being an artist, I end up seeing art, and that would lead me to start investigating. I'll see an image, and there's no information with it, which is another reason why I make the images the way I do with information on the photographs, because there's no information on a lot of photographs people share on social media. So, at any rate, when I started delving into the massacre, also, Lord, Valerie, help me. What the gentleman's name?
You know, I got the whole, I've got a whole story about this because I did learn about, in California, I learned about the
John
Wilmington
Hope Frank.
Massacre.
That's who it was. He wrote a book.
After you explain that, I do have to explain
Yes.
this other piece of it that brings us back to North
But
Carolina.
the thing about Mr. Lightfoot, Manley, he got mad at a racist white woman that wrote, this is from the account he gave and the people with him gave, that he used his newspaper to come against this racist white woman. And I want to say, I don't think she was in North Carolina. She might have been. It's in the writing. And she started talking about big black buck. blacks and how dangerous they were, and we need to make sure
Yeah.
the big black men aren't able to walk free, are contained, are basically re-oppressed in a much stronger way. And she started talking about them attacking white women only and chill girls. And what a terrible thing, yada, yada, yada. He was incensed. So he used his newspaper and came back at her and did this long editorial. And he cut her down and cut the whole system down and told all these truths. And he just put it out there. They got mad because they came to, the white people in the area. And also, the people in Wilmington were very upset because at this point, Wilmington was one of the largest cities and ports in North Carolina and
And it
on the
was
East
very
Coast.
prosperous.
And on the East Coast.
And it was prosperous. And it
Very
was prosperous.
prosperous. And all because of enslavement.
Right.
So now freedom is here. We're in Reconstruction. Massive amount of black businesses. You had white people buying from the black people because they were so good at their crafts. I mean, you had everybody there. So you had several newspaper churches, all these organizations. So basically, when he when he did that rebuttal to her in his paper, that set off the group of white people who were already mad that black people had too much.
And they were at that point, as I remember from reading David Soselsky's book, literally the governance of Wilmington was the council, the city council was a integrated, significantly black members on the city
Right.
council, and that made up the coup. They were an legally organized
Where they
government.
kicked them out.
Mm-hmm.
See, again, what happened, they couldn't take it anymore. They didn't want black people to have anything. They didn't like, these are the ones, what I call the lost Confederates who refused to give up. It's all
Right.
about the
We're not
Civil War.
forgetting.
They're mad
Yeah.
because they lost. So they waited all these years and they're quiet and they're going along and they're planning and they just blew up. They could not handle, hatred and evil would just blow up in people when they hold it in. And so they kicked those people out of city offices, elected officials. They started rampaging. They really went against Manley. And they wanted him basically to apologize and to suck it up. And he refused. So basically, they attacked.
That's Mr. Manley.
Now, he had to escape. They were after him. Him and his wife had to be hidden in a wagon. They had to hide in homes. They had to hide. All these people, a lot of black people were burned out of their homes. They burned his building down. And I have another photograph. I'm not sure if it's on the website yet, but there's a photograph of his burnt newspaper building because they owned the building. And all these white men with guns are standing around it the way they used to stand around after they hung a black person and take pictures.
Right. And I understand that, from my reading of David's book is that it was people were killed, like 300 people were killed. And the other thing that was interesting is that there was significant interracial marriages and relationships.
And they didn't like that either.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like that. So there were natives and black people and white people actually marrying each other and having these relationships.
Which actually, now that was going on before the Revolutionary War too. So that's a whole nother part.
Yes.
That was going on way. There was no real thing about race and skin color. It wasn't enforced.
And the enforcement started coming, especially during post-Reconstruction in the Black codes, in the laws that were generated to make sure that the races were separated and that there were legal injunctions against interactions of particular kinds like intermarriages. But I want to say that before David Soselsky is writing about this, close to the time of just after this happens, Charles Chestnut wrote a book called The Marrow of Tradition.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught that as literature. Charles Chestnut was a black man who, if you would look at him, he could pass as for white.
Yes, he could. Yes.
He wrote a lot about he was from North Carolina, but also left us and spent the lifetime outside of North Carolina, Ohio, but wrote about home. He had different fictional works, but Marrow of Tradition follows closely what happened just before, during, and right after that Wilmington riot. And it is fictionalized on purpose, but it'd be considered historical fiction. And he's writing this at the turn of the century. So the story was known. It was not talked about. It wasn't, like you said, taught. I'm learning about it in a Black literature class at UC Berkeley.
Right.
And I say that because our literary arts, our folks who are poets and in the visual arts in music, documented all of what happened to us during these times, and they are an important part of keeping the stories alive.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, it's significant that you were in California because they certainly were not talking about it in North Carolina. We were not having this conversation in North Carolina.
John Hope Franklin.
And it was a Black, this is why Black history studies, Black studies was so important. And it just happened to be that this brother Roy Thomas, who was teaching the class, was so well versed in African American literature, just the whole of it, also having lived through the Black arts period. So they were documenting and making sure we kept these stories alive, just in the teaching of their students, their graduate students, and others.
And the other thing that's really so significant about your museum is that it does invite us to hear the rest of the story, because there's a narrative out there about who Black people were, what they did and did not do, their relative level of productivity, their achievements, and they're mostly told by white people and their lies. Their lies. And that's why this museum feels really important to me. But I also think it's why the conservatives are so afraid of these stories, to the point that they are now eliminating them from our education system, because it forces us to really see this country in the full nature of our country, of our society.
Exactly.
I understand the importance and why it is so important for white supremacists to eliminate Black people from America's story. But if you eliminate Black people in our story, in our history, and what happened to us, we really don't have a story of America.
Right.
There is no story of America that is true and relevant and honest without the lives of Black people.
That's right.
And without the stories of our experience and our relationship to whiteness and white supremacy. So, I mean, that's why I find this museum just, extraordinarily important at this point. But there's something else I want to take a look at on your museum.
Okay.
Okay, so you got American slavery, then you got segregation, and you got these bars, and I'm trying to figure out.
It's approximate now. It's approximate.
Right. So what does the yellow section mean, though? So we got American slavery, and then that period between 1865 and 1954. What did that represent in your timeline? Was that Reconstruction?
Parts of it is Reconstruction. Parts of it is the Black Codes. Parts of it is when the Klan came around, because the Klan was partly created from slave catchers, and that's also where American police come from.
That's right.
So because the Klan was made up of lawyers, white lawyers, doctors. They weren't all just
they were there was law enforcement. There was law enforcement.
Oh yeah,
and
that's why they wore hoods, because they didn't want anyone to know who they really were. So
and don't forget that white women were a critical part of the Klan too. You always see it masculinized, but those white women were all a part.
They helped keep it going. Right? They helped keep it going. Funded. They did fundraisers. Who do you think made the outfits?
Well, it's interesting, that part, because we don't see white women doing this. We kind of leave them out of the story of the racism and the efforts, not just passive participants, but the active efforts to maintain white supremacy and segregation. And we really don't talk about white women's participation in that. And I want to get your take on this, Val, in particular, because as we think about forming coalitions now and forming partnerships with white women and working toward women's empowerment, particularly after Roe v. Wade. The assumption is, I think, is that white women understand oppression and white supremacy like we do, but they don't.
No.
I mean, this last election,
Hmm.
53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. Tells me that we're not having the same conversation when it comes to talking about oppression and white
But
supremacy.
I also think the percentage in his first stolen term was 64% or somewhere in the
Yeah,
60s.
yeah,
So,
yeah, it was huge. So
because
we're clearly not having the same conversation and understanding of
not on
oppression
the day of
that
voting, we're not. No.
well, I don't know if we're having it at any point because after Roe, I thought, okay, this is a woman's story. This is a woman's issue. We're all gonna jump on this, and I thought that white women would, in large numbers, recognize their interest and the threat that this posed to their interest, and so that there would be sort of a natural coming together of women around addressing this. And boy, was I surprised.
And that's because what was discounted, we would see, and the people who would show up to our activist gatherings as Black women would be white women who had a certain kind level of understanding about what this struggle was all about, and the need they heard clearly when the discussion around being intersectional from Kimberly Crenshaw, etc. What was discounted was the larger majority of white women who were buying into the nationalist, fundamentalist Christian narrative that promoted them as these sanctified folk. They put the women, they wanted to be on the pedestal and gladly were saying, we don't want to have to work. We want to be taken care of. We want to have these babies. We need to have more white children. That undercurrent of and that vision of womanhood was something that was not expected because they were like quietly being recruited and groomed to be these ultra feminine, pro natalist, very much white supremacist actors. And that was why you get this promotion, this leaning it. I know it was crazy for me to see someone actually articulate misogyny caught on camera, the person who sits in the White House now, caught on camera as someone molesting women, talking negatively, and that folks still gave it a pass. And
Right.
I had to sit back and understand, how is it that you can give that a pass when we know in our bodies as Black women what that kind of assault means? We can't give passes to people who were sexual predators
Right.
because of our history
Right.
of
You know,
understanding what that meant. We were raped. We
well,
were
yeah.
children. We are descendants of women who were raped in order for us to be here. That white blood that runs through my veins and that minuscule point comes from a rapist. And that's a different perspective than what the fiction, the fantasy that's being sold through the prosperity churches about what it means to be so. And the fundamental Christian churches is really about promoting white supremacy and patriarchy.
So, Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book says that all of us are victims or products of sexual assault, that Black people in this country are the products of sexual assault. And I think he's reflecting on what you just said, Valerie, because I've been reading about something which is a term I didn't know until recently. There was actually a rule or an unwritten law called paramour rights. And paramour rights gave white men the right to assault any Black woman he wanted to without any consequence. It was like Black women, just by the fact that they existed, were the sexual, I don't know what the word is, of white men. They were like their sexual toys. Black women could not say no.
that came from enslavement times when they stopped the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you can't bring any more people over here, and you can't kidnap anymore. You can't enslave them. So how do we? Because the work was so bad, especially rice plantations. Your life expectancy may be 20 to 30 years. Rice
Right.
harvests and rice plantations were terrible. People also don't know there were breeding plantations where
Yeah.
they took teenage, once a young black woman started her cycle, they would take them away, sell them to, or rent them to breeding plantations. And they would bring black enslaved men, and with at gunpoint or at knife point, they would rape these women to impregnate.
And the white men would rape them and take their
Well,
babies, which were their
that's
offspring.
because they had to make more people to enslave, because the thing you're talking about came from that. We
Right.
have all rights over your body because we own you. And that's why this information that we've been collecting, no matter which category you go in, no matter if it's talking about how wonderful we lifted ourselves up and how we made a way, or collectively, it's very, very important that people know this. A lot of the information that Valerie and I have found was not online, and I have hand typed this information from books that are no longer in print.
Right. When this last election happened, and I saw that 53% of white women still voted for Trump after everything, I said to myself, I kind of kicked myself because, in fact, of the matter is, I should not have been surprised by that. I should not have been surprised. I mean, I think I had this hope after Roe that white women would come to some kind of consciousness about their own situation. So, what's happened to the progressive movement is that we've been kind of running a narrative that's a lie. The lie is that what for women is that women recognize their oppression in the same way. Well, no, we don't.
Mm-mm.
As a matter of fact, we can say that there are some women, mostly white women, don't even experience themselves as being oppressed at all. And some white women even seeing the liberation of women of color as antithetical to what they want to see in the world. And because we have not, in my opinion, really owned the truth of that, our movement has been set back a bit. It's been skewed because I don't think we're coming from the same consciousness about it.
And this is what Audre Lorde was talking to us about, especially that collection of essays, Sister Outsider. She was ringing the bell. Toni Cade Bambara, all of these black feminists, especially the early ones, were saying, okay, pay attention to the rhetoric that's being used, that we are not aligned in the same way and it will have consequences. And we were still, I guess, raising our own consciousness among our own black women with the hope that small group of white women who seemed to be aligned with us really represented, like you said, more than what it did.
Right.
And that was what we kind of didn't recognize. But part of it too is this lack of full knowledge of Black history
Mm-hmm.
and culture as a part of the US helps to keep folk silent about these things, or to be able to ignore certain things that happen or that have happened in order to perpetuate what they want to see. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think back at all of these, like, it didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't just
Mm-mm.
one incident. So as you had, as Lynda described, this whole practice of growing new enslaved persons by having breeding plantations, which we don't talk enough about, we also have the laws that are being formulated as cases are being brought in terms of the resistance, especially Black women's resistance to their oppression. So Celia, a slave, is a story of a Black woman who was enslaved, married to another enslaved Black person, but much like Harriet Jacobs, was preyed on by the white master.
Right.
And it came to a point where, as she was pregnant, that she killed him in self-defense.
Yes.
She's arrested, and this is in Missouri. So people say, oh, this is not deep South stuff. This is in Missouri. So then there is this controversy in the law about, well, did she have the right to defend herself? Because white women did have the right to defend themselves against a prey, and it comes against being attacked or assaulted. It comes down to black women had no rights, that, and we hear this over and over again in the courts, that should be respected, and
That's
that
right.
she isn't a full person, and she's kept in jail, and she's kept in jail long enough for that baby to be born, because that baby is enslaved, and then they hang her.
Yeah. And that's the story of Ruby McCollum. I think this was in Florida, where this was a black woman who had some relative wealth. Her husband ran, I think, a funeral home, so they were relatively wealthy. But the white doctor repeatedly required her to have sex with him, and she killed him, and had the same sort of response, which is under paramour rights, he had the right to have sex with her. But she was it really, if you read the story of Ruby McCollum, it was so bad that it literally broke her down spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. It was so brutal that
Mm-hmm.
one of the defenses, because she had an attorney, was that her mental capacity was gone. I mean, she had literally lost her mind. And the thing that made this story so compelling was that she got up one Sunday morning, got her gun, and walked to his office, which was the doctor's office, and walked in and shot him. So from the outside, it looks like here's this woman with malice aforethought that got up and intentionally killed this white doctor. But the rest of the story is what needed to be told. And it's, again, this is one of those stories that we're just hearing about now.
But
Yeah.
And
do
yeah,
you know the story of Joan or Joanne Little?
Yep,
yes,
right here in North
1974.
Carolina.
That was in
North
74.
Carolina. And I remember pulling for Joanne Little
Yeah.
because I think she escaped. And I was really pulling for her. I mean, let her get away. But
So
yeah, and
that
so
falls
there's
into the same category of what you and Valerie are talking about. That
yeah.
And also in the area down in our southeastern part, like not too far from in that Wilmington area, again, we're having, or eastern North Carolina, where is it that this oppression is most, where we don't tell the story, and then you start peeling away the layers, and that's what happens when you go through the museum. It peels away layers and layers and layers of information, so that you're able to drill down and make connections across the whole state.
Well, there are a couple of more I want us to take a look at and talk about that I found interesting. There's a slide called Negro Hunted, and this is the story
oh
of
yes.
a black woman, Sampson, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
She was defending her husband or trying to keep him from being lynched,
Yes.
and two white women accused her of assault.
They accused her husband.
They accused her. Oh, okay. So tell the story.
So what happens is on Sunday, October 1st, 1939, in Sampson County, North Carolina, Sheriff C.C. Tart arrested a young black woman for helping Andrew Troublefield, a 21-year-old black man. She was helping him not to be lynched.
Mm-hmm.
The previous day, two women accused Mr. Troublefield of assault. Without verifying the women's stories, the sheriff led a mob of 500 white people in pursuit of this man, Mr. Troublefield, with the intention, as the newspapers reported, to lynch him without a trial if he was caught. So that's the gist of it. I did a
Uh-huh.
little bit more
Yeah.
research of what we could find. Again, I collect research. So originally I found this on EJI, and they have a calendar on their website, like on this day, which would have been in what was it, October 1st, 1939. So I found some other research, like newspaper articles and stuff like that, and eventually I will go back and link those things. What my thing is, because some of the stories that I post and have collected are long. There is so much information. In fact, there's so much. I don't even put it all on there because I feel it's too much, and I don't want to wear people out. Then there are things where it's a clip. It's just a painting. It's just a newspaper article. You can't find anything else about it online. Now, I don't go into archives in person and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The whole other point of the museum is to bring everything that we can find. Really, it finds me. I don't have to look far. Most of these people's stories find me, if that makes sense, when I'm online. But it's also to hopefully engage people to go look up some more if they want, if they've never heard of it,
Right.
to learn how to do their own research. Also,
Yeah.
we wanted this museum to be multi-generational. So we told our web designers we wanted someone in the third grade of elementary school all the way up to 80, 90 years old with limited education, limited
Wow.
understanding of internet, whatever their limits are. We want them to be able to come to this museum site and navigate it easily. So
Right. Yeah.
that's why it's laid out so simply, and that's why there are some images and whatever I could find, like the first one you brought up about the KKK. There's a backstory to it, but when I found the image, I just used what was with the image
Yeah.
in the Harper's newspaper at that time.
So as we close out, there's another image I'm interested in because I found this fascinating. Blackbeard's ship.
Oh yes.
Tell us, what's that story
Val,
about?
I'm gonna let you do that. Val is involved with a lot of the research going on with that right now. I'm gonna let her take that part. I know a lot about it, but yeah, I'm gonna let her tell that. Go ahead.
We can do it together. So what I don't cover, you can cover. And it is a fascinating North Carolina story. So Blackbeard's ship is also known as Queen Anne's Revenge. But before it was Queen Anne's Revenge, it was called La Concorde, and it was a French slave ship out of Nantes, France, which is a coastal area. We learn this whole story. My involvement began because of my connection with the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. So, as chair, we have privy to these different projects that the staff is engaged in. And one of them is called A Tale of Two Ships. In fact, this just ended. This is, again, why funding from IMLS, the people who fund museums and libraries, was so critical. They gave us generous support to find out the story. So one piece of the story is that they knew that this Blackbeard's ship had been wrecked off the coast in the graveyard of the Atlantic off North Carolina's coast. Hurricane helped uncover it, and so there's been work to excavate the ship, to do underwater archaeology and to bring the ship. In doing so, you learn about, well, the history of it. And the story is Blackbeard commandeered the ship from the French, when it was La Concorde, and he renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge. That's a whole nother story about who Queen Anne is. And he only had it for a few months until he ran it aground. On board that ship, when he, as a pirate, got it, were enslaved Africans. And so what happens is when I say we, it's the collective we, our researchers found evidence of it being a slave ship, and it was a slave ship for years before it was Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge. And so that's why it says A Tale of Two Ships. And on board, to document that it was actually a slaver, they've been finding like gold dust, waist beads, those little teeny tiny beads that you string together and that African women wear around their waist or as part of trade. Those beads were found on board, little gold weights. So these were all clues, plus the ship's manifest and learning about it. So we did a whole project where researchers went to Nantes, France on 2 trips to find out more about it, and also to Martinique, because the ship, some of the former enslaved were put off ashore in Martinique. sort of kind of emancipated, or they paid Blackbeard to release them, and then they were bought. So it's a fascinating story about something that people just love. They love to talk about Queen Anne's Revenge, the QAR, and what it meant, and it's a pirate ship. But the story of piracy and privateering, people need to understand that they are very much implicated in the whole transatlantic slave trade.
Right. That's why I found this, because that was really a piece of new information for me.
When they found the ship, they refused to listen to certain white and black people who were saying it was previously a slave ship.
Mm-hmm.
Slave
And
ship.
they found some black divers. There's an organization of black divers who dived looking for crashed slave ships in the waters, and they found
Slave
slave
wrecks.
wrecks. They found
Well, shipwrecks.
shackles for children and babies.
Wow.
They
Yeah.
found all the shackles for adult. They found a good amount of evidence. So that's when the other people said, "Oh, well, I guess it was," but they don't want to play that up.
And so that's part of the challenge with the State Museum,
Mm-hmm.
to curate it properly so that people know the full story. There were medical instruments on board.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ships that was excavated by the Black divers was the Henrietta Marie.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a traveling exhibit that I saw in Atlanta years and years ago. And they also had that exhibit at the Cape Fear Museum in Wilmington several years ago. Walking into that exhibit and seeing those baby shackles
Mm-hmm.
and thinking
Yeah.
infants are being shackled.
Exactly.
Where in the hell? I'm sorry, but where are they going? How are they escaping?
Right.
That
Yeah.
brutality, that level of inhumanity,
That's right. That
it
level of
just,
cruelty.
it
Right.
took my breath away. I
Yeah.
just stood and cried.
Yeah. It's really compelling.
And that's part. Even though we have been discussing the hardships in this particular collection, we have all kind of Black history life. I call them North Carolina Black history life stories, because they're the life
Yeah.
stories, and to mention these people's names to keep them alive so they can rest. They've been
Right.
hidden, on purpose. I know they have been. Our stories are willfully, intentionally hidden, and they started with school. That's how you control people, is by what you teach them and what you don't.
Yeah. That's also why we do this podcast,
Yes,
because it's important to understand the bigotry, the exclusion, and the ignorance that has been the landscape of this society. And what is beautiful about this museum is that it is entertaining. And you could literally, I mean, my experience of it is, and I started looking at it and I thought, well, I'm just going to look at a few little pieces because I'm not sure that. And then I kept looking and I kept clicking on explore, and then this came up, and then I said, oh, well, let me go. Then I went to the agriculture. So this is an astonishing, wonderful, brilliant project that you two have put together. And I felt like it was really important that people know about it. And if we were sending people to it, what would be the address? How would people get to this website?
they can get to it by putting in their search engine, all one word. I remember our history.org. I remember ourhistory.org. And
Okay.
several things you're gonna see the Facebook page. You're gonna also see the IG page that we created for the museum to
Okay.
keep it in social media for the younger folk and a lot of the older folk our age, more mature people. Because I had a T-shirt on running the Bojangles the other day, and the cashier was like, "Who is Dubois?" She didn't know how to say his name, and it was a quote about systems aren't going to work for you that weren't made for you. One of his quotes. And she said, "Can I take a picture?" She said, "No, what is this at I remember our history?" I said, "Oh, that's my museum." And she had to be about 18, 20 years old. Her eyes got so big, she called two more workers over and said, "Read her shirt. Read her shirt." And I'm just
Right.
going to get a sausage biscuit. So when you wear, what we wear teaches. So there are so many ways to teach. And that's the thing
Right.
about this. And hopefully people will pass it along and teach their children. Now, we do also have a collection for lynching, but we have a warning to let people
Yeah.
know it can be graphic. And if you read this warning, and then if you still want to enter, fine. But if parents
So I
sit with their kids or grandkids or whatever, and help them navigate it, they can pretty much tell. But I figure if white kids can understand about being oppressive and racist to young black kids, then, they can learn about it too.
And what Lynda hasn't said, just real quick, you'll see that it's named for her
Yes, the
grandparents.
name of the museum is actually the G.C. and Frances Hawley Museum. So they were my maternal grandparents. And if you click about, you will be able to read about their lives, and you'll see a little story, a little introduction, welcome from Valerie and I. And also, even though it's named after my grandparents, Valerie's family was just as involved and revolutionary. These are the
right.
people that are not really widely known. People, and I like the stories. Jack Shelton Green, our North Carolina poet laureate, who I think you know. I have
Right.
one of her ancestors in the gallery, and she's working right now to get me some more information about her family, as I'm also waiting on you, Miss Pat. And we put stories. We also have a family history collection, and it's not just for North Carolinians, because I need people to understand people were sold. There was migration
Yeah.
happening. Freedom seekers were migrators to me. They were leaving one place, leaving, going to a place where they wouldn't be murdered and enslaved. So, in the family history, we take anybody. We also have white researchers who have researched the enslavers in their own families. So, we put some of their research up too, because they have wills, they have access. So, it's to help people find their families.
Yeah. So I want to thank both of you for coming on. We may have to do this again because we have just barely touched this museum, and there are other things that we might want to
Sure.
come on and talk about. But Lynda Edwards, artist extraordinary, I love your work. I have some of it work in my house. And Dr. Valerie Johnson, anthropologist, writer, brilliant minds, both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your museum on the program today.
And we thank you
Thank
for the
you.
invitation. We appreciate you, and we are more than welcome to come back anytime you want. That's
All right.
already a
Yes.
yes, because there is a
I'll be,
lot
Yes.
in the museum, and by the time we come back, it'll be even more because I'm adding every
that's
day.
right.
Yes,
Okay. Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
love you.
Yes, we do.
Love you too. We love you too.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for joining our podcast. Please visit our website, everybodyasourOwn.org, and join our monthly Here, HEAR, and Now conversations. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe to us. It is deeply appreciated. See you next time.